I'm pleased to say Senator Matt Canavan joins me now. Matt, that was a striking admission, bearing in mind how Chris Bowen and climate activists are using this risk assessment.
Yeah, look, it was blown out of the water, their whole campaign, just from some simple questions there. It came because I was asking these officials about whether they'd looked at the massive amounts of agricultural land that would be destroyed by the rollout of wind, of solar factories, of carbon offsets that have to be made. A recent report done by the University of Queensland, Princeton University, found that we'd need half the size of Victoria to reach net zero, and I wanted to know what they had assessed for this. And they said, oh no, we didn't do that. And I said, well, how can you assess whether or not it's worth cutting emissions if you don't look at the costs of doing so? And as you just heard there, that's not what they were asked to do. So the question has to be asked then, why has the government spent so much of our money? It was also revealed this was $22 million, 350 people worked on it. Why have they done all this if it hasn't given us any actual answers about how we should tackle climate change? It would appear we've spent $22 million on the government scare campaign, which they've put in place to try and con people to support the policies that they've already decided upon.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's pretty obvious why they've done it. It's to soften everybody up in preparation for whatever Chris Bowen is going to inflict upon us. There's another question you asked, which I thought was quite brilliant. The report warns that people will die due to heat, but is that more or less than would have died if winters remained cold? Here's some of that interaction.
I'll be very quick, just to follow on really. Did you estimate the potential reduction in deaths from cold?
No, we did not.
Why not? My understanding is more people die from cold than heat in Australia.
We were specifically looking at climate hazards, so it was out of scope for our report.
But if the climate warms, won't there be fewer cold deaths?
We were looking at physical risk from climate hazards specifically, and that transition risk, which has included any changes to do with mitigation, were out of scope.
But this is not a mitigation risk, this is a direct result. Presumably if the climate warms, there'll be fewer people who die because it's too cold. Am I missing something? Or?
That was outside of our scope.
Thanks, Senator Canavan.
Okay, thank you.
Matt, the fact this question wasn't even entertained demonstrates the absolute bias of the way this science is being conducted, does it not?
It's a one-sided report. The government's loaded the dice here to try and generate the results it wants. The result it clearly wanted was this massive sort of Chicken Little approach where they could go run around telling everybody the sky is falling in. And in fact, though, as I mentioned there, I've gone and have looked at the research on this. There's a recent Nature paper, peer-reviewed paper, which shows that 10 times the number of deaths in Australia occur due to cold than to heat. Now, this is a report into global warming. And so if the globe is going to warm, you think you should look at whether or not it does lead to fewer deaths from cold, because it will be warmer, won't it? If there is global warming, that's what I thought it was all about. Instead, of course, we had this fear porn this week that somehow we're going to have a 400% increase in heat deaths, but no mention of the fact that, in fact, 10 times the number of Australians die from cold than heat. Again, this just shows that the government is more interested here in scaring people so that it can increase the size of government than it is really about changing the temperature of the globe. Of course, nothing we do can impact that. This report also only looked at Australia. It didn't look at any global ramifications, despite this being a global issue, because I come back to the point. The agenda here is to increase taxes, not to change the temperature of the globe.
Well, as you would expect, union leaders as well as the Greens are insisting the government has to set ambitious emissions targets or else we're all going to die. ACTU President Michelle O'Neill said if the government doesn't act, the consequences will be dire. If the government sets targets promoted by the unions, they're suggesting around 75% reduction by 2035. The consequences will certainly be dire for their members' jobs.
Well, that wasn't assessed as we've just gone through in this report. And keep in mind again that this is these activists, these union representatives, are no longer representing their workers. They're representing an ecosystem of climate activists. I'm up here in central Queensland where the ecosystem is being destroyed by the rollout of wind and solar factories. But the ecosystem that does benefit from climate action is that of a massive army of climate activists and paid professionals, sometimes bureaucrats, who just live off the teat of the billions of dollars that are spent on this issue every year for no tangible benefit. We're all paying for that, they benefit. And you're absolutely right though to say that who is out there representing the workers? Because again, I'm here in North Queensland and we could have a decision within days where the Mount Isa copper smelter shuts, the Townsville copper refinery might shut too. We could lose tens of thousands of jobs because of our crazy high energy prices. And what is the government doing? The government, your government, is not focused on those 10,000 manufacturing jobs. They're focused on their own jobs in Canberra to try and change the temperature of the globe. Where are this government's priorities? Why aren't they focused on saving our manufacturing industry and keeping Australians in a job?
I'm not sure climate change is much of a threat to you or I, Matt, but it's a massive threat to the Liberal Party. Andrew Hastie said yesterday he would join Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price on the Liberal backbench if Susan Lee adopts net zero. Here's what he had to say.
If Susan Lee, though, supports net zero by 2050, where does that leave you?
That leaves me without a job. I've nailed my colours to the mast, Gary. Like, if I go out with the tide in 2.5 years, that's great. My primary mission in politics is to build a stronger, more secure, more competitive Australia. Energy security is a vital input to that.
And today, Shadow Minister for Education and Training, Senator John O'Doniam, had this message for his leader.
Net zero at any cost is something that only stupid people would pursue. If we just said net zero at any cost by 2050, I think you'd find there'd be a mass exodus.
Matt, Susan Lee can't afford to dither on this issue much longer, can she?
Well, look, I've been saying for years now, James, that we should resolve this issue. We should resolve it the normal way we do for issues that are quite contentious at times. We have a debate. We have a debate, discussion in our own party room that hasn't happened. As I say, I think that should have happened 3 years ago. Better late than never. The sooner we do it, the sooner we can move on, work out what we stand for and take up the fight against the government. So I hope that happens sooner rather than later. I applaud the leadership that Andrew Hastie has shown. I think even more than bringing down cost of living, than protecting those jobs, what the Australian people would love to see in their political representatives again is leadership, is people with the guts and courage to stand on what they think is best for our nation and go out and fight for that. Stop following the polls, stop being scared of your own shadow and stand up for what you believe in. And Andrew Hastie is showing that in spades, putting his job on the line for this. I've been at that battlefront too and I'll continue that. This is my final battle almost, right? This is so important for our nation. It's why I've been at this for years and hopefully we finally get this debate in the Liberal and National Party room and we can resolve our differences.
Matt, just before I let you go, there's been a major blow to Victoria's green ambitions with the development of an offshore wind farm stalled over questions about costs and where ships would dock during construction. Just tell us, what's the problem with this wind farm? And they've already set an expiry date on fossil fuel power in Victoria. If projects like this wind farm aren't completed on time, it'll literally be lights out for Victorians, won't it?
Look, it seems a pretty flimsy excuse to me, and you've got to ask the question, why haven't they resolved this issue? This has been going on for years, so why didn't they have a port ready and available? There is a broader issue here, though, that there have been a lot of offshore wind projects fall over in Australia, and we're now, what I'm hearing is we're reaching a point where we won't have the critical mass to support offshore wind being developed in this country. It takes, you've got to bring a lot of equipment a long way from the other side of the world to put in these wind turbines. And if there's only a couple or handful of projects going ahead, it's just going to be way too expensive. So to me, this seems like a bit of an excuse to hide the broader problems in the Victorian Energies Plan. And as you say, they haven't got a plan B. They put all their chips here on a technology that is extremely expensive. Offshore wind is very, very expensive. Takes massive government subsidies to get up. And it's on its knees right now around the world with a number of companies on the brink of bankruptcy. And so why would Victoria do this? It is so sad to see, given Victoria has traditionally been our industrial heartland. It too has been losing so much manufacturing. I mean, where are we going to have the jobs for young Australians in the future if we keep denying ourselves the use of our own energy resources? They'll all go overseas and we'll be much poorer for it.
Indeed. Senator Canavan, great work at the Senate Estimates Committee hearing today, and thanks for joining me tonight